In the year 1869, long after newspapers claimed freedom had arrived and laws insisted chains were broken, there still existed places in Pennsylvania where time refused to move forward, and on one such forgotten plantation lived a girl named Eliza Brown, a name spoken so rarely it almost felt imaginary even to her. A girl born into labor before she was born into language, raised by orders instead of lullabies, and taught very early that silence was safer than truth, because on that land silence kept you breathing and attention invited pain. Eliza was 16 years old, though her body felt older, her shoulders bent not by age but by repetition, by lifting, by carrying, by bending again and again until the motion lived inside her bones. Her days began before the sun made any promise to rise and ended long after it disappeared without apology. And between those hours, she scrubbed, hauled, cleaned, cooked, fetched water, tended soil, mended clothes, and absorbed insults like rain soaking into dry earth. Never enough to drown her, but always enough to remind her she belonged to nothing. The plantation itself sat on wide acres of land that once looked beautiful from a distance, rolling fields, old trees, and wooden buildings, worn thin by years of neglect. But up close it smelled of rot, sweat, and damp wood. A place that had learned cruelty so well it no longer needed to shout it. The owners spoke softly and smiled often, which somehow made everything worse, because punishment delivered calmly felt final, unquestionable. Eliza had been told since childhood that she was lucky. Lucky to have food, lucky to have shelter, lucky to be useful. Words used like tools to dull pain rather than heal it. And she learned early that hope was a dangerous thing, something that could grow too big and get cut down fast. Yet despite all of this, despite the weight of every day pressing against her chest like a stone, Eliza noticed things others didn't. Not because she was special in the way stories like to pretend, but because she had nothing else to hold on to. So she held on to the world around her, the way the dirt changed texture near the creek, the way the air smelled different before rain, the way certain parts of the land felt wrong under her feet, heavy, restless, like something trapped underneath trying to breathe. While others walked past these signs without thought, Eliza absorbed them quietly, filed them away in a place inside her no one could reach. She listened when men talked, not because they talked to her, but because they talked around her, as if she were furniture, as if her presence didn't matter, and that made them careless. They spoke of oil towns growing overnight, of black liquid pulled from the earth that burned and powered machines and made poor men rich fast. They spoke of wells and drills and fortunes whispered about like legends. Eliza didn't understand the business of it, didn't know what oil could do, but she understood tone, she understood hunger in voices, she understood greed because she had seen it wear many faces, and she understood that whatever this substance was, it made people forget their humanity quickly. Still, she never imagined it would find her, never imagined that the land she worked, the land she bled into with every blister and cut, held something so valuable beneath it. Her world was small by design, her steps measured, her thoughts guarded, and yet the land did not care about design or permission. It shifted and breathed in its own time, and Eliza felt that long before she saw it, on cold mornings when the ground seemed warmer than it should, on days when the soil stained her hands darker than usual, on moments when she paused, bucket in hand, feeling watched by something unseen. She had learned not to question too much, because questions were dangerous, but awareness was different. Awareness was quiet, and Eliza was very quiet. The other workers barely noticed her moving between buildings, a thin shadow against old wood, her eyes always lowered not from shame, but from strategy. She knew that eye contact invited interpretation, and interpretation invited punishment, so she learned to look at hands, at boots, at dirt, and in doing so she learned more than most ever would. She learned which boards creaked before breaking, which men drank too much before lashing out, which paths were safest after dark, and which parts of the land felt like they were hiding something. The plantation itself operated under the illusion of order, routines enforced, rules spoken and unspoken, but underneath it all was fear. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear that the world outside was moving forward while this place remained trapped in its own shadow. And Eliza existed inside that fear every day, a living reminder of the system's cruelty and its dependence on bodies like hers. She was not beaten every day, which made her suffering harder to see, but she was worn down steadily, like stone shaped by water. Her dreams, when she allowed herself to have them, were small, not freedom or escape or justice, but rest still. Hence, a day without commands, a night without dread. She did not imagine herself as a hero or a discoverer or someone whose name would matter. She imagined herself surviving, and sometimes not even that, sometimes just enduring long enough for the day to end. And yet even in endurance there was observation, even in silence there was attention, and that attention tied her to the land in a way no owner's claim ever could. She felt its moods, its warnings, its quiet shifts, as if it recognized her suffering and chose her as its witness. There were moments when she stood alone at the edge of the fields, bucket hanging from tired fingers, listening to the wind move through grass and trees, and she felt something close to peace, not happiness, not hope, but a pause in the ache. And those pauses mattered, because they reminded her she was still human, still capable of feeling something other than pain. The plantation did not see that humanity, did not care for it, but the land did not need permission to speak, and Eliza, whether she knew it or not, was listening. The year 1869 would be remembered by history for growth, for industry, for progress. But on that plantation, it was remembered only as another year of work, another year of silence, another year where a girl named Eliza Brown woke up before dawn and stepped into a world that demanded everything from her and promised nothing in return, unaware that beneath her bare feet, beneath the soil she had walked 1,000 times before, something was waiting, something dark and powerful that would change everything, and that the first to notice it would pay the highest price, not because she did anything wrong, but because, in a were. LD ruled by greed, even discovery could become a sentence. The morning it happened did not announce itself with thunder or prophecy. It came the way most turning points do, quietly, disguised as routine. Eliza woke before the bell as always, her body already moving before her mind could protest, the cold sharper than usual, cutting through the thin fabric of her dress as she stepped outside, the ground stiff beneath her bare feet, winter not yet gone but weakening, leaving behind a dampness that clung to everything. She was sent to the far edge of the property to haul water and clear debris near a shallow ditch that ran along the lower field, a place most people avoided because the soil there swallowed boots and patience alike. Eliza didn't complain because complaining never changed assignments. It only changed how closely you were watched. She carried the buckets, their metal biting into her palms, and as she walked, she noticed the smell first, sharp and unfamiliar, not rot, not manure, not wood smoke, but something heavier, something that burned the back of her throat. She slowed without meaning to, her eyes dropping to the ground as they always did, and that was when she saw it. A dark stain spreading through the pale dirt, not water, not mud, but thick, glossy, almost alive, bubbling slowly as if the earth itself were breathing it out. She froze, fear rising before curiosity, because anything strange on that land usually meant trouble. She knelt cautiously, keeping distance, watching as the black liquid oozed up and pooled, staining her fingers when she brushed the soil aside. The substance clung to her skin, sticky and stubborn, refusing to wash away with the little water she had. The smell grew stronger, and with it came a memory, overheard words from months before, men talking late near the barn, laughing too loudly, speaking of oil strikes and sudden fortunes, of towns exploding with money and men abandoning farms overnight. Eliza had not understood then, had only understood the hunger in their voices, the way their tone changed when they spoke of it. And now that hunger echoed inside her chest, not because she wanted wealth, but because she sensed danger. She knew instinctively that this thing did not belong to her world, that it carried consequences too large for someone like her to survive. She tried to cover it with dirt, frantic, scooping soil with shaking hands, pressing it down, but the black liquid kept seeping through, stubborn, patient, as if amused by her effort. Panic tightened her breath. She imagined punishment, imagined accusations, imagined being blamed for damaging the land, because blame always traveled downhill, and she was as far downhill as one could go. She considered leaving, pretending she never saw it, but the stain was too large, too obvious, and the smell carried on the wind, betrayal already in motion. Footsteps approached, not hers. Voices followed, sharp and curious, and before she could decide, before she could disappear, the plantation overseer stood behind her, staring past her as if she were invisible, his eyes locked on the ground, widening not with concern but with recognition. He knelt where she had knelt, dipped a finger into the black pool, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, smiled, a smile Eliza had never seen before. Not cruel, not angry, but hungry, satisfied. The kind of smile that or got people existed. She tried to speak, tried to explain she had found it by accident, that she meant no harm, but her voice came out thin and useless, swallowed by the sudden noise as more men were called, men she had seen only from a distance, owners, managers, strangers whose boots were too clean for this place. They gathered around the spot, talking over one another, words tumbling out fast now. Oil, well, land claim, profit. Eliza stood among them holding her empty buckets, no one looking at her, no one acknowledging her presence. And in that erasure, she felt something worse than fear. She felt herself being removed from the moment she had created, the discovery unfolding without her, as if the land itself had chosen someone else to speak for it. One man finally noticed her, his gaze cold and assessing, and asked what she had been doing there. The overseer answered for her, saying she was where she was told, nothing more, nothing important, and just like that, her role was decided. She was a witness without a voice, a tool that had served its purpose and could now be set aside. Orders were given quickly, the area roped off, guards posted, Eliza told to return to her duties, but she lingered, watching as the men argued and celebrated, watching the way their bodies leaned toward the ground as if pulled by gravity, watching how the black liquid reflected their faces in warped shapes. And she realized then that the land had changed ownership in their minds, even if no papers had been signed. Whatever this oil was, it belonged to power, and power never belonged to her. By afternoon the plantation buzzed with activity, messengers sent, equipment discussed, the usual route. Inez disrupted by excitement, Eliza moved through it all like a ghost, still working, still cleaning, but now with eyes following her more closely, suspicion replacing indifference, because she was the one who had been there first, and being first without permission was dangerous. She scrubbed floors with oil-stained hands that would not come clean, the smell clinging no matter how hard she tried, a mark she could not erase. As night fell, she lay awake listening to voices outside, men drinking, planning, dreaming aloud of money and machines. She wondered if the oil would keep rising, if it would flood the land, if it would swallow the plantation whole and free her by accident. The thought scared her as much as it comforted her. She did not want destruction. She wanted quiet, but the ground had spoken now, and once spoken it could not be silenced. Over the next days the black liquid was tested, measured, confirmed, and with confirmation came transformation. Trees cut, ground torn open, the rhythm of the plantation replaced by hammering and shouting. Eliza was moved closer to the site, ordered to fetch tools, carry messages, clean spills, always under watch, always within reach, as if they were afraid she might steal the earth itself if given the chance. She noticed how quickly kindness vanished from the few who had shown it before, replaced by calculation. She noticed how the owner's voice changed, louder now, more confident, already spending money not yet earned. She noticed how the land screamed without sound as it was pierced and ripped, and she felt a strange guilt settle in her chest, irrational but heavy, as if she had betrayed something by noticing it at all, as if the oil had trusted her, and she had failed it. She dreamed of black rivers chasing her through fields, of hands pulling her under the surface, of voices accusing her of bringing this curse. And when she woke, she realized the dreams were only exaggerations of waking life, because already whispers followed her, already eyes narrowed, already the story was shifting, no longer about discovery, but about blame, about who would be responsible if anything went wrong. Eliza understood then that finding the oil had not lifted her from her place. It had marked her, and marks on people like her were rarely signs of favor. They were targets. The worst part was not that she was excluded from the celebration, It was that she was included in the consequences, tied to the discovery without any claim to it, her name never written down, her hands never acknowledged, and as the drills sank deeper into the ground and the oil flowed thicker, Eliza felt the future closing in, not opening. The land had revealed its secret, and in doing so, it had exposed her to a world that would consume both of them without regret, and she knew, deep in the same instinct that had noticed the smell before the stain, that this was only the beginning, and that whatever came next would not be kind. After the oil was confirmed, after the excitement hardened into certainty, the plantation changed in ways Eliza had never seen before, not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like a mask being torn away to reveal something sharper and more dangerous underneath. Men arrived daily now, not just the familiar overseers and owners, but strangers whose names Eliza never learned, because no one bothered to speak them aloud. Aro. Under her, men with papers tucked under their arms, men with measuring tools and polished boots that sank into the mud without hesitation, men who looked at the land the way hunters look at an animal they have already decided belongs to them. Their voices carried confidence and entitlement, and when they spoke of the future, they spoke as if it were already written, as if the ground itself had signed an agreement without protest. Eliza watched from the edges, always working, always listening, carrying crates, hauling water, wiping oil from tools that had never belonged to her, but now demanded her labor all the same, and with each passing day, the sense of being watched tightened around her like a rope, because greed does not like witnesses, and it likes reminders of origins even less. The overseer's tone toward her shifted first, sharper, impatient, correcting her for mistakes she hadn't made, watching her hands more closely than before, as if the oil might somehow cling to her again and follow her away if she weren't careful. She was ordered not to speak about what she had seen. Not that anyone had ever asked her to speak before, but now the silence was enforced with intent, not habit. The plantation owner himself called her once, a rare thing, his voice calm, his words chosen carefully, telling her she had done nothing important, that the land had always been known to contain value, that her presence that morning had been coincidence. And Eliza understood the message beneath the words clearly. Coincidence could be erased, but claims could not, and she was not to become a claim. As drilling began in earnest, the land groaned under the weight of machines. Trees fell like tired men. The air filled with smoke and metal and shouting, and the quiet rhythms Eliza had once known were replaced by chaos. Yet within that chaos there was a strict order, and she remained at the bottom of it, always needed, never credited. She noticed how quickly the plantation's rules bent when money was involved, how old restrictions vanished for men with investments, how morality softened when profit hardened. Men drank openly now, celebrated loudly, spoke of expansion and ownership as if the land were infinite and consequences imaginary. Eliza saw greed take shape in real time, watched it change people she had known all her life into strangers, their faces tighter, their patience thinner, their eyes always scanning for threats to their fortune, and slowly, inevitably, those eyes returned to her, because she represented something uncomfortable, the truth that the discovery had not come from expertise or foresight, but from an enslaved girl doing her assigned labor, and that truth did not fit the story they wanted to sell. Whispers followed her movements, not loud enough to confront, but loud enough to isolate. Questions asked behind her back, suggestions made about her behavior, her loyalty, her intentions. Someone claimed she lingered near the wells too long. Someone else said she watched the oil flow as if memorizing it. Another suggested she might talk if given the chance, and in a place where fear had replaced caution, suspicion spread faster than fire. Eliza felt the shift deeply. Though no one announced it, she was given harder tasks, longer hours, sent to work closer to the rigs where accidents were common and mercy was rare, and when she tired, when her hands show. Okay, or her pace slowed, it was noted, recorded not on paper but in memory, to be used later if needed. She stopped sleeping properly, her nights filled with the sound of drills echoing in her head, the smell of oil clinging to her skin no matter how much she scrubbed. She felt marked, not visibly, but internally. As if something invisible had been painted on her that everyone else could see, she remembered the old instinct that had always guided her, the one that told her when to stay quiet and when to move, and now that instinct screamed at her constantly, telling her that being seen had become dangerous, that being remembered would be worse, yet she could not make herself smaller than she already was, could not disappear any further without ceasing to exist, and that frightened her more than punishment ever had, because punishment was expected, but erasure was final. The men talked openly now about securing the land, about legal boundaries and claims, and Eliza heard her own fate discussed indirectly, suggestions that workers who knew too much might be sent away, sold, relocated, words spoken casually without cruelty, which somehow made them crueler. She realized then that freedom had never truly arrived for her. It had only changed language, that ownership could exist without chains, that silence could be enforced without whips, and that greed did not need laws to protect it, only fear. One evening she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear, two men speaking near the storage shed, their voices low but careless, one asking what should be done about the girl, the other replying that loose ends were dangerous, that stories had a way of spreading, if not conta. Ined, that it would be easier if she were gone before real money arrived. Eliza stood frozen in the dark, breath shallow, the words settling into her bones like cold. She did not know what gone meant exactly, but she knew it did not mean safe. From that moment on, every order felt heavier, every glance more loaded. She began to measure time differently, not by days or weeks, but by how long she might have left. She thought about running, but running required somewhere to go, and the world beyond the plantation was not kind to girls like her, especially ones without names, papers, or protection. She thought about speaking, but speaking to whom, and for what, and at what cost? She thought about the oil itself, about how it had risen from the ground without malice, simply existing, and how humans had wrapped it in violence the moment they understood its value. And she wondered if the land regretted revealing its secret, if it would have chosen silence had it known what would follow. The plantation owner's behavior grew more erratic as drilling continued, obsessed with progress, with numbers, with speed, dismissing concerns about safety, about pressure, about fire, because caution slowed profit, and profit had become the only measure of worth. Eliza saw corners cut, warnings ignored, equipment pushed beyond limits, and she sensed disaster brewing the same way she had sensed the oil, not through knowledge but through pattern, through the feeling that something was being forced too fast, too greedily. And when minor accidents began to occur, spills, small fires quickly extinguished, injuries brushed off, she noticed how blame was assigned immediately downward, always to workers, never to decisions, and she knew with a clarity that chilled her that when something truly terrible happened, and she believed it would, there would need to be a sacrifice, someone to absorb responsibility so the flow of money could continue uninterrupted, and she was the easiest choice. The girl who had been there at the beginning, the girl whose presence complicated the story, the girl whose name no one had bothered to write down. Greed had awakened fully now, no longer a whisper but a force, reshaping the land, the people, and the future. And Eliza stood in the middle of it, unseen yet central, bound to a discovery that would never be credited to her, and consequences that would. And as the drills dug deeper, and the oil flowed thicker, she understood something terrible and simple, that the worst danger was not the oil, not the fire, not even the men who controlled it, but the truth that in a world ruled by profit, innocence was not protection, it was liability. The night everything broke apart did not feel sudden to Eliza. It felt inevitable, like the final breath after a long illness everyone pretended not to see. The air had been wrong all day, heavy and sharp, carrying the smell of oil stronger than ever before, clinging to clothes, skin, even thoughts. The drills had been running non-stop for days, pushed harder and deeper, the men shouting over one another, tempers short, caution abandoned, because every hour lost was money delayed, and money now mattered more than sleep, more than safety, more than lives. Eliza had been ordered to stay near the storage sheds that evening, cleaning tools slick with oil, her hands aching, her fingers raw, the black liquid seeping into cracks in her skin like ink. She noticed how the ground trembled faintly beneath her feet, a vibration she had never felt before, not from thunder, not from wagons, but from something straining. Underground, she tried to ignore it because ignoring things had kept her alive this long, but the instinct that had warned her before would not quiet now. It screamed, telling her the land was under too much pressure, that something was about to give. She glanced toward the main drilling site and saw flames flare briefly, then disappear. Men laughing it off, slapping each other's backs, calling it nothing, just a spark, just oil being oil. She wanted to speak, wanted to say something, anything, but her voice felt trapped in her chest, because she knew how that story would end, her words twisted, her concern reframed as accusation, as interference, as guilt. So she stayed silent, and that silence would later be used against her. Night fell quickly, darker than usual, clouds swallowing the moon, the plantation lit by torches and lanterns that flickered nervously in the wind. Eliza was carrying a crate when it happened, a sound like the earth cracking open, followed by a roar so loud it swallowed screams whole. Fire erupted near the well, not a controlled burn, not a manageable spill, but a violent explosion, oil igniting in a rush of heat and light that turned night into blinding white. Men scattered, shouting, some frozen, some running. The flames climbed faster than fear could react, feeding on everything, the smell unbearable, thick and choking. Eliza dropped the crate and stumbled back, heat licking her face, her dress catching sparks. She slapped at it desperately, heart hammering so hard she thought it might tear free. Orders were shouted, not to save people, but to save equipment, to protect barrels, to move records, because those things could be replaced with M1. Why, but money could not replace lost money. She saw men dragging crates instead of injured workers, saw someone fall and not get back up, saw a body outlined briefly in fire before disappearing behind smoke, and through it all she felt the terrible certainty settle in her bones that this was the moment greed had been building toward, the moment it had required. Chaos gave cover, and cover allowed decisions that would never be spoken aloud. Someone shouted her name then, sharp and accusing, and that single sound cut through the noise like a knife. Eyes turned toward her, not with concern but with blame. Someone screamed that she had been near the well earlier, that she was always too close, always watching, always around. When things went wrong, Eliza tried to move away, tried to find shelter, but hands grabbed her arms, rough and unforgiving, dragging her toward the storage building, the overseer's face red and wild, his words tumbling out fast, calling her careless, calling her cursed, calling her the cause. And in that moment she understood fully, not with panic, but with clarity, that the story was already being written. And she had been cast as the villain because villains were necessary, because accidents needed explanations and explanations needed bodies. She was shoved inside the storage cellar, the door slammed shut, darkness swallowing her whole, the heat outside rising, smoke seeping through cracks in the wood. She banged on the door, screamed until her throat burned, but her voice disappeared into the larger noise, the roar of fire, the shouts of men saving what mattered to them, and then the shouting moved away, the fire spreading, the plantation choosing its PR. Priorities. Eliza crouched on the dirt floor, coughing, tears streaming, the air growing hotter by the second, and in those final moments she did not think about oil or money or history. She thought about water, about cool mornings, about the smell of earth before everything went wrong, about the simple wish she had carried quietly all her life, to rest, to not be afraid, to be seen as human. Outside, the fire raged for hours, destroying buildings, consuming trees, turning years of labor into ash, and when dawn finally broke, the plantation stood half-burned, blackened, but not ruined, because enough had been saved, enough equipment protected, enough oil secured. The owner surveyed the damage with tight lips and calculating eyes, already planning the rebuild, already thinking of insurance, of claims, of profit delayed but not denied. When questions were asked about the girl, answers came quickly, practiced. She had panicked, she had disobeyed orders, she had caused the fire, she had run, she was gone. Some said she was taken away before the worst of it. Others said she disappeared into the chaos. No one mentioned the cellar, no one checked the locks, no one asked too many questions. Because questions slowed progress, and progress was sacred now. Eliza Brown did not receive a burial, did not receive a record, did not receive justice. She became a rumor, a convenient explanation, a shadow blamed for a disaster born of greed. Within days, drilling resumed, safety tightened just enough to satisfy appearances, the story refined and repeated until it sounded true even to those who had lived it. The fire was an accident. Accidents happen, sacrifices are necessary, and no one spoke. Her name again and less forced, and even then it sounded strange, like a word from another language, something outdated, unimportant. The land, scorched and torn, continued to bleed oil, thick and dark, flowing into barrels that rolled away toward markets and cities and futures built on suffering. And beneath the ground, beneath the ashes, beneath the silence, Eliza remained, not as a body marked by a grave, but as absence, as the space where truth should have been, and that absence settled into the land itself, heavy and permanent. The worst thing had not been the fire, nor the pain, nor even her death. It was the ease with which the world accepted her disappearance, the speed with which profit erased a life, and the way the earth kept giving while remembering everything. Years passed the way they always do after something terrible, quickly for those who benefited and unbearably slow for anything left behind. The plantation did not remain a plantation for long. It couldn't, not after oil had rewritten its purpose. The burned buildings were cleared, the blackened trees cut down, the scars covered with steel and machinery, and soon maps no longer marked the place by a family name, but by production numbers, output reports, and contracts signed far away by men who never stepped foot on the soil itself. Pennsylvania changed around it, towns grew, rail lines stretched outward like veins, refineries rose, and newspapers praised progress with confident headlines. Yet beneath all of that movement the land remembered, not in ways that could be printed or proven, but in ways that unsettled those who stayed long enough to notice. Workers spoke quietly of strange things, oil seeping up where it shouldn't, thick black pools forming overnight even after wells were capped, machines failing without explanation, fires starting without spark, and some laughed it off as superstition while others crossed themselves and worked faster. Because belief didn't matter as much as survival, but there were moments, especially at night, when the air grew still and the ground seemed to breathe, when men swore they heard footsteps where no one walked and coughing where no one stood. The company dismissed these stories, of course, calling them fatigue, imagination, the cost of long shifts and isolation. But stories have a way of surviving dismissal, especially when they are fed by truth. Eliza Brown's name never appeared in official histories, not in land records, not in payrolls, not in death notices, because she had existed in the space between recognition and ownership, a life useful but undocumented. Yet absence has its own weight, and over time that weight pressed into memory. Old workers who had been there in the early days spoke of a girl who noticed things, a girl who smelled oil before anyone else, a girl who was blamed when greed finally caught fire. They spoke in fragments because fragments were safer than full stories, and even those fragments were shared only when trust felt certain, because the lesson of Eliza's disappearance had been learned well, that truth without power was dangerous, and remembrance could cost you more than forgetting. Still, forgetting was never complete. The oil itself became a kind of witness, staining the land, staining hands, staining fortunes. Every barrel pulled from the ground carried a silent debt, though no one calculated it. Sit. Ease burned brighter, machines ran longer, industries expanded, and somewhere in that chain of benefit was a girl whose life had been traded, without negotiation. Eliza did not become a symbol in her time. Symbols require visibility, and she had been denied even that. But symbols have a way of forming later, when distance makes honesty easier. Historians would one day speak of early oil discoveries, of risks taken, of progress earned through sacrifice, using that word lightly, sacrifice, as if it were a choice rather than an imposition, and those accounts would mention accidents, fires, unnamed workers lost. But they would never dwell on who paid first, who noticed, who was erased to keep the story clean. The land itself carried the fuller record, old wells that refused to dry completely, patches of earth that remained darker than the rest, no matter how much time passed. And there were moments, especially after rain, when the smell returned sharply, burning the back of the throat, and people unfamiliar with the place would wrinkle their noses and ask what it was, and the locals would answer simply, "Oil," as if that explained everything, as if it were a natural condition rather than a wound. Some claimed that on certain nights the oil bubbled up on its own, slow and steady, as if repeating the moment of its first discovery, not violently, not dramatically, but insistently, refusing to stay buried, and those who saw it felt an unease they couldn't explain, a sense of being watched by something patient and unblinking. Eliza's story did not inspire justice, it did not bring accountability, but it lingered as discomfort, as the reason some men refused to work night shifts alone, as the reason others drank more than they should, as the reason prayers were whispered in places where prayers had never been needed before. Progress continued because it always does, because it feeds on momentum and forgetfulness. But not everyone forgot. Some children born into the towns near the old site grew up hearing fragments of the story, warnings wrapped in folklore, tales of a girl who found black gold and vanished, told not to scare them but to teach them something adults struggled to say plainly, that wealth often has a beginning no one wants to remember, that history is shaped as much by silence as by action, and that the land does not give without taking something in return. Eliza Brown never received recognition, but she received something stranger, persistence. Her absence became part of the place, inseparable from its identity, and even those who never heard her name felt her presence in the way the ground resisted, in the way success there always seemed slightly cursed, slightly unstable. Companies came and went, profits rose and fell, but accidents never stopped entirely. There was always another fire, another spill, another unexplained loss written off as the cost of doing business. And perhaps that was the oil remembering, not out of vengeance but out of truth, reminding the world that it had been discovered not by ambition or genius, but by a girl forced to work land that would never love her back. The worst thing had not been her death, or even her erasure. It was the lesson the world took from it, that progress could continue unchallenged, that a life without records could be removed without consequence, that silence could be mistaken for consent. And yet, despite everything, Eliza endured in the only way she was allowed to, not in monuments or documents, but in the uneasy feeling that settled over those who learned too much, in the stories told half complete, in the land that refused to forget what it had been forced to give, and long after the last well was capped and the last machine shut down, when people spoke of that place and wondered why it never quite felt clean, never quite felt finished, the answer lingered beneath their feet, dark and patient, waiting, just as it had in 1869, carrying the memory of a girl who noticed, who survived as long as she could, and who paid for discovery with everything she had, while the world moved forward and called it progress.